One Piece is a series with some of the best flashbacks, not just in anime but in all of fiction. Ichiro Oda is the king of flashbacks, and one could argue that the flashbacks are one of the best things in the story, if not the best. After the most recent flashbacks in the story, we now have over 20 different flashbacks in One Piece. While we have many good ones, now is actually the time to separate the good ones from the great ones in the show. That's why in this video I'm going to be ranking the top 10 flashbacks in One Piece. For this video we'll have 3 different criteria to rank each flashback. So we'll have an objective view while ranking each flashback. The criteria are emotional impact, relevance to plot, and impact on theme. I believe these are the best criteria to properly analyze all of the flashbacks in the story and truly distinguish them to be able to get a credible top 10 list. So yeah, let's get into the video. Before we get into the actual ranking, I'm going to dissect how flashbacks are approached by Oda in the story. This is necessary to help you understand the ranking process of the video. And the first thing we're going to do is analyze the writing style Oda uses for flashbacks in the story. So how most flashbacks in One Piece usually go is like this. The main character of the flashback typically starts out in an okay to bad situation. Sometimes they might even be in an extremely low situation, as it might be pretty rough for them. After all of this is established, we're introduced to a secondary character which offers a ray of hope to the main character of the flashback. They usually help uplift the main character and put them in a typical better situation that they started out in. However, everything is eventually snatched away from the main character of the flashback and they have to start over from the beginning again. They would then have to navigate their life until we pick up with them in the main storyline of the series. Now that we understand how flashbacks are typically written in the series, let's start with the first flashback in this list. Nami's flashback is relatively bare bones because we're so early on in the series, but it does follow the same exact pattern as most of the flashbacks in the series follow. Nami's life was not horrible, but it wasn't great at all. It was just kind of middling there. She used to do things like having to steal books she wanted to read and reuse old clothes that Bellemere made for her. Bellemere was the shining ray of light in Nami's life though. She did everything in her power to ensure that Nami had everything she needed to survive and most importantly, feel loved and part of a family. Nami though did not necessarily appreciate all of these things Bellamy was doing for her, and this is just mostly because she was a child and didn't have the full scope to appreciate all of this, as she even told Bellamy all of this right in front of her face and essentially broke her heart. But honestly, Bellemere didn't care about all of this because even though Nami could still say the most horrible things to her, she still loved her deeply. That's why when Bellemere told Arlong that Nami and Nojiko were her kids and she could never disown them even if it meant death for her, yeah, it was just very heartbreaking. For most of the people that started watching One Piece for the first time, a lot of them say that Arlong Park is where everything clicked for them. And I believe this scene right here is the reason why, or is a majority of the reason why everything started to click for them. Predictably, after Bellemere is killed, Nami's life takes a turn for the worse. Arlong manipulated her to be in his crew, and she was essentially put in a sinkhole that she couldn't even imagine being in the first place. Not only did she have to work for the person that killed her mother, but she also got alienated by her village because they couldn't understand why she was working for Arlong, the person that killed her mother. Everyone just assumed Nami was just being Nami and she was just being selfish and doing it for money, because she even acted that way and told them straight up that yeah, it's used for money. And there we have it, the typical formula for One Piece flashback. Most of the flashbacks follow this same formula. It's just all molded in all different shapes and forms, as we'll see going on in this video. This formula right here, it's all this bread and butter. For the sake of the length of this video though, I'm not going to be explaining how flashbacks go going forward. For the flashbacks that do have a twist to this formula, I'll stop and elaborate on them, but no more explaining how flashbacks go. Now let's rank Nami's flashback. And the theme that this flashback emphasizes on is family. I think the perfect example to use for this is Whitebeard and Big Mom, specifically with how they treat their crew. Even though 99% of all the Big Mom pirates are her own children, we've still seen Big Mom do heinous things to her kids, such as ridiculing Pudding because of her third eye, abusing Chiffon because she looked like Lola, and even killing one of her own sons. R.I.P. Moscato, gone but not forgotten. Then you have someone like Whitebeard and we see how he treats his crew. It's pretty evident that Whitebeard treats all of his actual crew like a family, even though none of them are related. I mean, we'll just even use an example. Look at Squad. He wasn't even an actual member of the Whitebeard Pirates, he was an allied member of them. Whitebeard still forgave Squad after he betrayed him and stabbed him because he saw Squad as a son, like how he does for all of his other crew members. Family in One Piece is determined by the bonds between people, not by the blood. That's why it's one of the most important themes in the story. We know as a crew, you have to see yourself as allies at the bare minimum to be successful. As the 2018 warriors of the One Piece world did not even see themselves as allies, that's why they failed. I truly believe the great crews in One Piece, they even go further than that. They don't see themselves as allies, but rather as family. The bond between a crew and how much they see themselves as family and love each other determines how far the crew will go in the story of One Piece. And we have many examples for that. It's shown that only the crew with the deepest of bonds are the ones that truly ascend to the top in the One Piece world. Nami's flashback does a great job of explaining to us why this theme of family is very important in the story without having to show too much to us. And it essentially serves as an introduction to this very important theme in the story. That's why for this category, it gets a 4 out of 5. Next, we move on to relevance to the plot. Because this was so early on in the story, this flashback does not have really any relevance to the plot of the story. There was no information that was given that explained previous events in the story or foreshadowed further events in the story. The flashback was essentially just for us to truly understand Nami. But really, that's not enough because every other flashback in this list also does the same thing, so we can't just give our points for that. I'd even argue some do a better job at this than Nami's flashback. As I said, this flashback is very brief and it doesn't offer a lot. That's why when it comes to relevance to the plot, it gets a 1 out of 5 in this category. Lastly, we have emotional impact, and I'd say that this is the hardest category to rank by far because it's the most subjective. As readers and viewers, were really moved by different things, so whatever makes you sad necessarily might not make me sad. But as I said earlier, personally I've heard that a lot of people say that Arlong Park is where everything clicks for them in One Piece, and I believe this flashback has a huge role in this. But at the same time, we don't get a lot of developments in the flashback to really get us emotionally invested in the characters, so that kind of ducks points. So I'll give Nami's flashback a 3.5 out of 5 in this category. This brings the total for Nami's flashback to an 8.5 out of 15, and it places as the 10th best flashback in One Piece, which is a huge feat because we have a lot of flashbacks in the story. I mentioned I'll point out when Oda deviates from the typical formula he uses for flashbacks in the story, and this is the first one that he does so far. As this is the first flashback in the story where it's a bit ambiguous who the main character of the flashback actually is. Is it Noland or is it Kalgara? It might seem like Noland, but it's actually Kalgara the more you think about it. You actually start the flashback with seeing Kalgara, which is the first indicator that the story is about him. And if you actually think about it, he's the one that lost Noland, not the other way around. As Noland is killed in the flashback, meanwhile Kalgara is lifted up into the sky, and he's still alive even after this. So for the most part, we experience this flashback from Kalgara's perspective. And the flashback is actually even told from a Shandorian's priest perspective, so they can truly only have Kalgara's perspective about the flashback, as the story was passed down through Shandorians and they live in the sky, so they have no outside connection with anybody else. Noland and Kalgara's story are just so intertwined, so it might be a bit ambiguous who the story is actually about, but it's about Kalgara. Moving on to the ranking. Now, for the first ranking, impact on themes, obviously. The theme that this flashback focuses on is trust. At first glance, this might not seem as one of the most important themes in the story, but Oda actually has 4 unique storylines in the series to show how important trust is in One Piece. It's no coincidence that Oda has used multiple storylines to show to us that trust is a very important thing when it comes to the story of One Piece and real life, to be honest. People and the dynamics of their relationship change every time. Noland and Kalgara's flashback is a great example that showed us this. The clash of the ideals of two men who couldn't be any more different was very interesting to watch. From the very beginning when they met to the end when they got a resolution, we got a short and concise story that showed us why trust is so important, not just in One Piece, but in real life in general. Because of this, I think this flashback gets a 3.5 out of 5 in this category. Next, relevance to plots. This is actually the first flashback in the story where we got a decent amount of important details that are relevant to the plot of the story, as we're able to get an explanation as to why Upper Yard was able to go to the sky and why Jaya was split in half. We also got a little bit of information about the poneglyphs, nothing too crazy, but just a little snippets. And the whole flashback even provided context to us as to why the bell was so important in the first place. And we get a bit of history of Skypiea here and there. So a 3 out of 5 is pretty good for this flashback in this category. Lastly, emotional impact. Yeah, if we're being honest, this is actually the weakest part of this flashback. And I don't even think it's because of a lack of effort or anything like that. It's just that the competition is so stiff, to be honest. A lot of other flashbacks have so many deeply emotional moments. I think the one emotional moment that stands out is when Kalgara tells Noland to come back after he finds out that Noland didn't destroy the trees for his sake and he did it for the village's sake. But if I'm being honest, I haven't actually really heard anybody talk about how emotional this flashback is. And yeah, that's my point. It's just not as emotional compared to the other flashbacks in the story. So yeah, I just have to give it a 2 out of 10 in this category, to be honest. And yep, it places 9th in the story. But yeah, you might have noticed he has the same score as Nami's flashback. So why is it ahead? It's mostly because Skypiea has a lot of importance to the story of One Piece. It's basically a microcosm of the story of One Piece. So yeah, it just gives it a slight edge there. When it comes to impact of things for this flashback arguably emphasizes on the most important theme in the whole story, and that is dreams. Why can't all diseases in the world be cured? Why can't the All Blue be found? Why can't a map be created that can navigate the whole world? And even simple things like, why can't I have a family? Dreams are the single most important thing in the story of One Piece. They are the driving force for everything that most characters do in the story of One Piece. I honestly really can't do enough to emphasize how important dreams are in the story of One Piece. It shapes up characters in the story and the choices they eventually go on to make. Dreams are just single-handedly the most important thing in the whole story. I don't even need me to tell you this. Just look at Luffy. Finally, if a person's dream is important enough, it will be passed down and inherited by others. As this has been shown multiple times in the story, both good and bad, Chopper's flashback executes the importance of this theme extremely well, and it's done mostly through her look as he instills the importance of dreams to Chopper, which eventually led to one of the most iconic speeches in all of One Piece. For all of this, I give Chopper's flashback a 5 out of 5 in this category, and it's the first 5 out of 5 in this list. Next, we move on to relevance to plot. Again, this flashback was pretty early on in the story, so it does not really have much relevance to the plot. That's just really how things are with most flashbacks that are less than 100 episodes into the story. So because of this, it gets a 1 out of 5 in this category. Lastly, we have emotional impact. Wow. Yeah, there are a lot of tearjerkers in this flashback. We really got to see the connection develop between Chopper and Herlook, and it was just so wholesome to watch. The way both of them were willing to go so far for each other, wow, it was just so touching. Which makes the events of the flashback even more heartbreaking when they eventually play out. I give it a 4 out of 5 in this category, as this one really hurts. I cried when Herlook died. It was very emotional. With this total though, Chopper's flashback has 10 out of 15 points, and it places as the 8th best flashback in One Piece. This is the only flashback that's split into 2 halves, and we get both halves at different points in the story. Still, this doesn't diminish how impactful the flashback is to the story. We got the second half of the flashback first, and the first half of the flashback later in the story. Zeph is the secondary character that was introduced that helped uplift Sanji's life and make it better. Luckily for Sanji though, Zeph never passed away, which is much different compared to other secondary characters that were introduced in flashbacks, as Sanji was able to live out his life with Zeph until he met Luffy and the Straw Hats. The half of the flashback we got in Whole Cake Island is obviously the first half of the flashback. I am going to analyze both flashbacks as one, so get the whole context for this flashback. Moving on to the ranking. The theme that this flashback tries to convey is a theme that has appeared in multiple flashbacks in One Piece, and that's resiliency. I'll touch on how Oda reuses different ideas in the story to tackle different themes he wants to talk about from different angles in a later flashback in this video. That being said, let's focus on Sanji. You know, I always wondered why Sanji's flashback was so dark compared to all the other flashbacks we got in East Blue. Like, Bro, he was stuck on an island and nearly died of starvation. If we're being real, nearly dying of starvation is way worse than losing your friend. Agenda aside though, we got the full context to all of this when we got to Whole Cake Island. After we met Jimbe, it became pretty obvious to us that Sanji had been through hell and back. We saw how he was slowly broken down. Even after he escaped, it didn't end there, as after he even met Zeph, he had to go through the whole starvation ordeal. So yeah, Sanji really went through a lot. Even with all the severe hardships he had to go through, he persevered. He fulfilled what Reiju told him to set out to do. This is just another flashback where Oda was deep in his bag. It's just not as strong as the original portrayal of resiliency when it comes to flashback. Hence, I give it a 4 out of 5 in this category. Moving on to relevance to the plots. Surprisingly, there actually isn't a whole lot here. Even though we have 2 different halves of the flashback that are more than 700 chapters apart. As the information that we even got about Jimbe wasn't all that mind-blowing because we had already met Jimbe before we got the flashback. But we did get some context as to how Sanji ended up in the East Blue. As there were instances in the show where Sanji knew a whole lot more than Nami, Usopp, Zoro, and Luffy. Which was weird because they were all from the East Blue, but Sanji always seemed more knowledgeable than them when it came to a lot of things. For the longest of time, it was just weird, like how did Sanji know things about the Grand Line and other blues? When we got this flashback, we eventually got the context to that, so that was pretty cool. But as I said, not a whole lot when it comes to relevance to plot for this flashback, so yeah, it gets a 2 out of 10 in this category. Lastly, for emotional moments, this is honestly up there with one of the best of them in the story. Bruh, seeing all of Sanji's emotional and physical turmoil, bro, come on, that's just heartbreaking stuff right there. Like, bro, Sanji has been through a lot. It's so heartbreaking, like really. I think the most heartbreaking moments in the whole flashback when we look at both of them is when Sanji found out that Zeph didn't have food and he was so confused as to why Zeph would help him. This was because he was so broken down that Sanji didn't even believe that people would just want to help a kid out of genuine good intentions. So much so because his siblings and George had harmed him and hurt him so much emotionally and physically that Sanji didn't even believe that people would want to help him. That's just to show you how deeply scarred and broken he was at that point. Our favorite cook really went through the wire. And seeing him overcome all of this just made it worth it. And I think this flashback deserves a 4.5 out of 5 in this category. This brings the total for Sanji's flashback to a 10.5 out of 15. With this, Sanji's flashback places as the 7th best flashback in One Piece. This flashback at surface level might seem like Fisher Tiger and Otohime's flashback, but really it's Jimbe's flashback. Let's analyze why. The flashback starts with Jimbe being in an okay situation as he was a guard for the royal family. Then we get introduced to the second character, that character being Fisher Tiger. I would say Fisher Tiger does not necessarily offer Jimbe a ray of hope in his life. Rather, he gives Jimbe a new purpose in life. Instead, it's Otohime that offers a ray of hope to Jimbe. As a matter of fact, it's not only Jimbe. Otohime offers a ray of hope not just to Jimbe but every fishman in the whole of Fishman Island and beyond. Jimbe's life was definitely more fulfilling when he was with Fisher Tiger, as he seemed pretty lackluster when he was a guard. Plus, he also got to spend time with his brothers, that being Fisher Tiger and Arlong. Eventually though, like most flashbacks in the story of One Piece, Jimbe lost Fisher Tiger, the character that had the most impact on his life up until that point in time. And just like the other main characters in flashbacks in One Piece, he was forced to pick up himself and navigate his life. We just got to see more of an extended view of this compared to other flashbacks in the story. Usually for most flashbacks we don't really get this. We just kind of see 1 or 2 things and he ends there. Then we see them in the main storyline of the show. As for Otohime, like I said, she is the ray of hope, not just for Jimbe, but for every fishman. And her goals are aligned with Fisher Tiger's goals. So it's only natural that the flashback shifted focus to her, as it also has ties with Fisher Tiger's story. But it's just from a different perspective, if we're being honest. If we really look at it though, Jimbe was more visibly distraught and broken when Fisher Tiger died compared to when Otohime died. And like I said, this is because Fisher Tiger is the secondary character to Jimbe. It's not to downplay Otohime, it's just to show that it's Fisher Tiger that is Jimbe's secondary character. Hence, we're seeing everything from Jimbe's perspective. Now, moving on to the themes of this flashback, it's pretty obvious. It's about racism, discrimination, and slavery. Oda had slightly hinted at this, but we never really got to see it until we got to Sabaody. And that's because this is where we're introduced to the Celestial Dragons. That's when we really witnessed how deeply rooted slavery, discrimination, and racism are in the story of One Piece. This flashback sheds light on the problem in a very amazing way, using Fisher Tiger and Otohime to illuminate light on the issue. It provides a deep understanding of how things should really not be approached in a black and white manner. I do believe that Oda did a masterful job to show how evil slavery, discrimination, and racism is, and the profound impact they can have on the people affected. As for racism and the evil things it brings,
憎しみを子供たちに植え付けないで。彼らはこれから出会い考えるのですから。
Yep, she said it best. There are a lot of things Oda doesn't necessarily get enough credit for, and I think him handling this flashback is at the top of this list. When it comes to impact on themes, this flashback easily gets a 5 out of 5 in this category. Moving on to relevance to the plots, there's not a whole lot here, but we did get some good information about how Arlong ended up in East Blue. We got a lot of information that explained previous events that happened in the story. In all, we just got more context to previous events in the story, and yeah, it deserves a 3 out of 5 in this category. Nothing too crazy. Aside from Fisher Tiger and Otohime's deaths, the only real emotional moment in this story was when Fukaboshi said the speech to the Fishman people after his mother died. For this flashback, I really feel Oda focused on getting a message across rather than focusing on the emotional impact of the flashback. This flashback is emotional, but it's more so spread out of the tragedy of the Fishman people rather than like the tragedy of one person. That's why when Fukaboshi addressed the Fishman people after his mother died and told them, yes, grieve, allow the pain in your heart to simmer, and yes, we have to restart everything she tried to build up because that's what she wanted and we can't fail her. It was extremely touching. Very, very, very touching. But in hindsight, with Jimbe joining the Straw Hats, I would have liked for there to be more of an emotional moment with Jimbe, so us as readers would get more invested in him. I mean, he is a Straw Hat. That's the whole point. Like, there's always that flashback to get us invested in the Straw Hats. And I feel, compared to the other Straw Hats, Jimbe doesn't really have this. So because of this, I put the flashback at a 3 out of 5 when it comes to emotional impact, which brings the total for this flashback to an 11.5 out of 15, and Jimbe's flashback places as the 6th best flashback in One Piece. Out of all the flashbacks in One Piece, I strongly believe this is the most personal one. So much time was given to flesh out and develop the relationship Luffy had with Ace and Sabo. I won't say this is different from other flashbacks, but I'll just say the amount of time and effort that was given to flesh out these relationships is a lot. I believe Oda did this deliberately because it's Luffy's flashback. And if we're being honest, Luffy's Oda's favorite character and he wanted to definitely put a lot of effort and thought into this flashback. I mean, the average length of flashbacks in One Piece is about 2 to 6 episodes. This flashback has 12 episodes. It's just very apparent that Oda put a lot of effort into this flashback. And the theme that this flashback really focuses on is brotherhood, specifically the friendship that really comes with brotherhood. When it comes to friendship, it's pretty similar to family. There's just a bit more differences, and I'll elaborate on this. I mentioned in Nami's flashback that the strongest crews see themselves as a family, and I truly believe that the Straw Hats see themselves as a family. You cannot see the dynamic between all of the Straw Hats and say that they are in a family. Like, these guys are family. Underneath all of that though, there is a genuine friendship between all of them, and I believe that's why the Straw Hats are so special. Oda really takes the time to flesh out friendships in the story, and he does this this in such a great way. He doesn't even focus on things like testing the friendship. Instead, Oda focuses on the everyday bit of friendship, the little things, the banter, the jokes, that stuff that really makes what a friendship is. It's no coincidence that people prefer pre-time skip to post-time skip, as in the pre-time skip we got a lot of these moments, just a lot of moments where the Straw Hats just joke and banter, bully, laugh and cry and play with each other. That's what makes One Piece so wholesome and so fun. Luffy's flashback is banter galore, which makes it bittersweet because we know the conclusion of what happened. Considering that when we got this flashback, it was just right after Ace died, and seeing the relationship him and Luffy had. But wow, Oda just really used 3 little boys to show how the bonds and connection of friendships are so important. There's really nothing you can criticize about this flashback when it comes to impact on themes. It's flawless, and yeah, it gets a 5 out of 5 in this category. Moving on to relevance to plots. Most of what this flashback has is that it provides context to scenarios that already played out in the story. An example being what happened after Romance Dawn all the way to the beginning of the story when Luffy set out to be a pirate. The flashback provides a decent chunk of this. We get a lot of neat bits here and there. There's also a bit of information that ends up being relevant in the future, as at the time it was hinted that Sabo was still alive. It's just the right blend of things, nothing too crazy, and yeah, it gets a 3.5 out of 5 in this category. Finally, for emotional impact, I'm actually gonna highlight a scene from this flashback that just explains how the emotional impact of this flashback is.
どんなに威力があっても当たらなきゃ意味ねえぞ。やっぱゴムなんて戦闘武器じゃねえんだよ。なんだよ、俺が間違ったこと言ったか。お前は打撃の効かねえ金槌で十分じゃねえか。こののみをバカにすんな。渡してやる。ピストルよりもすげえの考えてんだからな。ルフィ、やるな。お前、昨日より手が長く伸びたぞ。
That was extremely heavy. Seeing Ace and Luffy's grieving process was extremely realistic and heavy. And all of this is without even mentioning Sabo's deaths. It's just very solid in this section, and it gets a 4 out of 5 in this category. This puts Luffy's flashback at a score of 12.5 out of 15. With this, it places as the 5th best flashback in the story. I mentioned that I'll touch on how Oda reuses ideas earlier in the video. Well, it's time to elaborate on what I meant. The way he does this is either to expand on a previous idea or to combine multiple ideas and give a twist to it. Once we enter the post-time skip, this becomes very noticeable. Let's dive into examples of when he does do this. Fishman Island expands on the events that happened in Arlong Park and help provide a deeper context to understand Fishman and what they represent in the story of One Piece. Punk Hazard takes elements of Whiskey Peak, Little Garden, Drum Island and combines them into one arc. The similar elements being used in each arc are Lord joining the Straw Hats in Alliance in Punk Hazard, Vivi joining the Straw Hats in an alliance in Whiskey Peak, and both characters later going on to serve a huge role in the story. Also, in Punk Hazard, we got introduced to members of the Don Quixote family, just like how we also got introduced to members of the Baroque family in Whiskey Peak and Little Garden. Lastly, we can see that Caesar and Wapol are very similar in the way they are portrayed and defeated by Luffy. And the most obvious one, Drum Island and Punk Hazard are both Winter Islands. As for Dressrosa and Alabasta, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Evil villain that's a Shibukai is enslaving a country, and the Straw Hats goes to the country to help save and liberate it. Both of these arcs are actually the first major events the Straw Hats got into when they Enter the Grand Line, and the New World. So yeah, it's pretty obvious how similar Alabasta and Dressrosa are. Moving on, Zou mirrors Jaya. Jaya being one of the first major arcs where a lot of prominent figures in the One Piece world were introduced, and Zou giving us major lore dumps for the story. Whole Cake Island is like an amalgamation of Water 7 and Thriller. As we can see that when we got to Thriller, that was easily one of the most creative locations in the whole show. The same thing with Whole Cake Island. Like, one it's a zombie wonderland, the other one is a Disney fairy tale land. At the point when the Strats arrived at both islands, they were both easily the most unique and creative locations that have been seen. Also, worth noting, Moria and Big Mom are pretty similar, just even their abilities. Snatching someone's shadow, snatching someone's soul, and like putting your souls either on homies or zombies. Also, Moria and Big Mom are the goofballs of the Shibukai and the Yonko respectively, like they're the gag characters of the group. As for the Whole Cake Island and Water 7 comparisons, both arcs cause a fracture in the Strat Pirates, and they have to resolve it in order to be able to go forward. As for Wano is basically like an expanded version of Enies Lobby, as the Strats go to war for what they want. In Enies Lobby, they went to war with the world government. In Wano, they went to war with the Yonko. So they're very similar in that respective element. And both are necessary because at that point, the Strats had to go to war with the world government to take the next leap. Same thing to go to war with Kaido to take the next leap. Lastly, Egghead Island is just basically Sabaody on steroids, as the major players in Sabaody are here. Kizaru, Sentamaru, Kuma, the Pacifistas, it's just literally Egghead on steroids. The only difference though is that I believe that the Strats are gonna prevail here, as in Sabaody they got defeated, but that's left to see. With that being said, now we know how Oda reuses ideas. So yeah, let's continue to Law's flashback. Law's flashback focuses on the themes of Nami's flashbacks, and that's family, and it expands on it on all different angles. As we see the dynamics of families with Doflamingo and Corazon's perspective, with their father and how that ended up, and also we see the dynamics with Law and Corazon too. One thing that I did find interesting is that Oda actually showed us that, yeah, blood doesn't determine whose family from a different perspective, from the antagonist perspective, because Corazon was the one that betrayed Doflamingo. And yeah, we could say that Doflamingo is evil, but Doflamingo was someone that legitimately really and truly cared about his family, and Corazon betrayed him. So it just showed that, oh wow, that even though they were blood brothers, he didn't see Doflamingo as family. And I think this line right here from Doflamingo, it just showed that, yeah, not everything really is black and white. The antagonists too, they do love people and they do have emotions and they do have feelings. It's just not on the protagonist side. And yeah, they can get backstabbed and they can get hurt. So it was just nice to see that, oh, that Doflamingo too, how he felt about being betrayed by his brother. Moving on, we see that Corazon and Law's relationship is basically Nami and Bellume's relationship. The only difference is that we got to see Corazon and Law's relationship develop. Corazon and Bellume, like, everything played out very similarly between them. As a matter of fact, if you look at it, they died in very similar ways. So yeah, I believe that Law's flashback is just really Oda taking the foundations of what he really established and building a mansion with it. He just went ham, and yeah, when it just comes to relevance to the themes of the story, Law's flashback, it's a 5 out of 5 in this category. Moving on to the relevance of the plot, we get context to things that already played out in the story, like how Virgo ended up with the Marines, Doflamingo's origins, and even little things like X-Drake's origins too, if I guess you cared about that. My bad, X-Drake. You're a good character. We also got information about things about like Fervence Town, Law's hometown, and you know how the world government operates and how they're just very scummy. But it wasn't really anything earth-shattering or anything too mind-blowing, to be honest. So it gets a 3.5 out of 5 in this category. Lastly, for emotional impact, yeah, just moving forward, a lot of these flashbacks are just gonna be so amazing in this section. But wow, Law's flashback, it just has so many moments, like with what happened to Fervence Town, what we see with Doflamingo and Rocinante with their father, like just so many moments. I think though that what really stood out for me when it comes to the emotional impact is that we got to see Law and Corazon's relationship develop from them hating each other to actually genuinely loving each other at the end. So when Corazon eventually got killed by Doflamingo, it was just so heartbreaking. Like, I'm always moved to tears whenever I watch that scene. This flashback, when it comes to emotional impact, it's easily a 5 out of 5. This brings the total for Law's flashback to 13.5 out of 15, and he places as the 4th best flashback in One Piece. I mentioned that Sanji's flashback reused the theme that was established earlier in the story, and yes, it's the theme from this flashback, Robin's flashback. However, Robin's flashback has a different approach to it, obviously. The very story of One Piece in its core essence focuses on the journey, not the destination. That's the whole point. That's why in the show we have so many detours that the Straw Hats take, and whatever goal you set out to achieve, it's definitely not gonna be easy. I don't think I have to explain how difficult the Straw Hats journey have been to get to this point they are in the series right now. And Oda used Robin's backstory to show us how important this theme is. Resiliency, obviously. Robin just always wanted to feel loved and cared about. She didn't even want anything special or anything too crazy. As soon as she was born though, she had an uphill battle that she would have to fight. And as the story progressed for her, the hill only got steeper, steeper, and steeper. To the point that just being alive on a day-to-day basis was a major challenge for her. But she kept on going, she kept on fighting, she listened to Soul, and she kept on pushing. It does get to a point though that even with all your will, you do want to give up. And yes, she did, but she was able to find people that were able to carry her will for her without her having to pass away or anything like that. She just had people that supported her and were always going to be there for her. This is where I feel that Robin's backstory one up Sanji's backstory. Robin never had a Zeph. Yeah, she had Soul, but like what, for 2 weeks or like a week? Up until the modern day where she met the Straw Hats, Robin always had to fight just to survive. The whole world was against her. She even gave up in this fight. Her Nakama had to carry on the fight for her because she was just so tired of the constant battle that she had to go through on a daily basis. That's why when she yelled out, "I wanna leave," it just put a full circle movement for the theme of resiliency. Just by viewing Robin and the Straw Hats, one thing is for sure, life is definitely gonna be hard. Oda uses Luffy and the Straw Hats journey to show this, just with how complicated and how hard the journey is to find the One Piece. And it's easy to forget how hard this journey is sometimes just because how long it is. It's just, you know, focus on what's next. It's hard to just encapsulate everything that's happened and be like, oh wow, that's actually very, very, very hard. Oda used Robin's backstory though just to downsize everything and make us realize that, oh yeah, wow, things are hard. Things will be a struggle. But no matter how bleak things are, you always have to keep on pushing and keep on trying. That's why I believe Robin's backstory deserves a 5 out of 5 when it comes to impact of themes. Moving on to relevance to the plot. This is the first time in the story where we actually got major lore details. We got information about the Void Sentry, we got information about how the world government operates. We got a whole lot, to be honest. It's essentially the first major lore dump for the series. This flashback also really showed us how evil the world government are. We got hints at it, but we never really saw it. But this flashback, he put it in full force. These guys are the worst. It might not seem like a lot, but at the time, we actually got a lot of information. So I think Robin's backstory deserves a 4 out of 5 in this category. Lastly, for emotional impacts, I'm just gonna come right out the bat. It's a 5 out of 5. If you didn't cry watching this flashback for the very first time, hey bro, I don't know bro, you gotta get checked bro, like you might be a demon or something. But for real though, you can't even really pick an emotional moments from this flashback. There's so many, like it's just wow, just so sad. So yeah, a 5 out of 5, which brings the total of Robin's flashbacks of 14 out of 15. This puts Robin's flashback as the 3rd best flashback in One Piece. I really struggle to settle on a theme for Oden's flashback as it just touches on so many things, to be honest. Ultimately, I couldn't settle for anything, but one thing I do believe though is that Oden's flashback is a love letter from Oda to longtime fans of the show. You see, the thing with Oda's writing style is that he's very tight-lipped when it comes to reviews, lore dumps, and things like that. This is a stark contrast for most modern day shonen as they tend not to be so tight-lipped with information and lore dumps. So, to get a flashback that not only gave us access to Whitebeard but Roger too was just so surreal to a lot of long-time readers of the series. I'm 22, about to turn 23, probably gonna be 23 when I watch this video. And yeah, I started watching One Piece when I was 10, and I caught up with the show when I was around 15. Seeing things like Roger clashing with Whitebeard, Roger pointing to the sky like Luffy did, or even how Teach joined the Whitebeard Pirates, it just really gave me chills, because these were things I just even never expected to see, let alone get elaborated on. It's hard to explain to newer viewers of the show, but it's just simply a payoff for following the series for so long. That's why I firmly believe that the greatest stretch of chapters in One Piece history is from chapter 963 to 968. Check it out, you know what I mean. This flashback is fan service galore, and it still manages to touch on different themes in the story. The themes just take a back seat because this flashback, it was meant to entertain us and not really give us a lesson, to be honest. Hence, it develops a 4.5 out of 5 in this category. Moving on to relevance to the plots. Come on, I don't need to elaborate more. It's a 5 out of 5. Lastly, for emotional impact, yeah, wow, we really did get to see the life of a great man from beginning to end in the most wholesome way possible. This flashback is very similar to Luffy's. We just got a lot of time and saw the development of Oden with everyone around him. And yeah, we had to get this development because up until the point where he was introduced, Oden was arguably the most hyped character in the show that wasn't revealed. Maybe aside from Vegapunk. I think Vegapunk was more hyped than Oden, but Oden was right up there. He really is a larger-than-life character that embodies everything about how we should try to live our life. Just make the most out of every moment. And wow, yeah, the whole boiling pot sequence, it's one of the best in all of One Piece. And we got one of the best one-liners. It's honestly up there with one of the legendary one-liners like I wanna leave and the One Piece is real. With all of this, yeah, Oden's flashback, it gets a 5 out of 5 in emotional impact, which brings it to a 14.5 out of 15 and makes it the second best flashback in One Piece. For the final flashback on this list, we have Bartolomeo Kuma's flashback. I genuinely believe this is the magnum opus for Oda when it comes to storytelling in the series. That's just how good this flashback is, but let's move forward to rating it. The reason why I rate Kuma's flashback so highly is because it touches on all major themes in the story in extreme detail. This is unique because even though some flashback might touch on multiple themes, usually one of them just gets center stage, and as the flashback progresses, others get put to the side, so this central theme could be focused on and fleshed out. For Kuma's flashback, all the themes that are introduced get elaborated on and emphasized on based on the plot line of the Black story. Like Jimbe's flashback, we see the horrors of slavery and discrimination. I'd argue though it's done even better in Kuma's flashback because we actually see the perspective of a slave in this flashback. This allows us to see the horrors of what the Celestial Dragons do firsthand. But even out of all the evil things that the Celestial Dragons do, I believe that one interaction in the whole flashback shows how evil slavery is and discrimination. After Kuma and Ginny get freed for the first time, Ginny tells Kuma that it might not be something important or worth celebrating, but for the first time in forever, she finally feels full and she breaks down in tears just because she's not hungry. This also makes Kuma break down in tears just because of how much they've been through. I think this simple character interaction might be one of the best ones I've seen in the story to date. Just that shows this is really messed up and something has to be done about it. It's just a very effective way to get the theme of discrimination and slavery out to the reader in a very concise manner. Through Kuma's relationship with Vegapunk, we're also able to see the theme of brotherhood play out. As the two did not have a friendship when they met for the first time, Vegapunk was only interested in his scientific research and Kuma was only interested in saving Bunny. As the flashback progressed though, we saw how their relationship developed and got really deep. Their relationship might not have had the usual day-to-day interaction like all the relationships have, but the friendship still got developed enough as we saw the unlikely pairing of two people that were not alike in any way, shape or form. As for family, Oda once again showed us that blood does not matter when it comes to families in One Piece and it's all about the bonds formed. Kuma's relationship with Bunny is no different with Corazon and Law or Bellemere and Nami. It's the same story being told about family, but I do believe that Kuma's own has the best execution in the whole series. And this is not to downplay Corazon and Bellemere, it's just that we saw Kuma slowly pass away over the course of his flashback to save Bunny, and it just made it all the more sad because we know what eventually happened after he lost his consciousness. Moving on to the most important theme of the story, dreams. I don't know whether it's because it was told about the story of Nika when he was a slave, but there's just something about someone like Kuma believing in Nika that's just so awe-inspiring. I mean, Kuma always used this belief to be his guiding lights for majority of his flashback. He even passed this down on to Bunny, as she saw Nika as a guiding light too, which also shows that, yeah, a man truly never dies if his dreams are alive, as his will was passed down to Bunny. Kuma might not be there to witness it, but his dream will be fulfilled. Nika will liberate the world and save tons of people from the Celestial Dragons and the world government. Lastly, resilience, the main theme of the story. The whole of Kuma's flashback just encourages us as readers just to push through and just to keep on going and never give up in anything you believe in. Kuma might be a fictional character, but seeing all the hardships he had to endure, not just for himself but for his loved ones, it really inspired and motivated me and made me take a lot more risks. It's not surprising that Kuma's flashback gets a 5 out of 5 when it comes to impact or themes in the story. As for the relevance to the plots, this flashback is littered with everything from minute details to major lore dumps. We also get context to things like how the Revolutionary Army started or how Egghead Island was made. But I don't think that's the best part of the flashback. I think the best part of the flashback is that we got to see almost all of the major events that have happened in the story, but from a different perspective, from Kuma's perspective, which gave us a brand new sense on these events. And it just made these events more relevant and meaningful in the modern day to us readers. Kuma's flashback elevated a lot of these events and just added more context to them. Because of that, Kuma's flashback gets a 5 out of 5 when it comes to relevance to plot. Lastly, emotional impact. Damn, I'm just gonna come right out with it. I think Kuma is the best written character in all of One Piece. Easily. I don't even think it's close. The amount of things this man had to go through and overcome, wow, he really is a saint. And he just really made me believe in positive things when it comes to people and how they are people that all want good for each other, to be honest. I honestly don't even think the point of the flashback is to make us feel sad about Kuma. I think the point of the flashback is just to see the inherent good in people, because Kuma always did that. He always saw the good in people and always wanted the best for people. So why can't you? The emotional impact of this flashback is truly profound on all levels, and it gets a 5 out of 5 in this category too. This brings Kuma's flashback to a perfect 15, making it the best flashback in all of One Piece. So, can Oda top Kuma's flashback? Well, honestly, I really don't know. But I do know that he'll push his storytelling capabilities. That's just what he does all the time. And I have really high hopes for the Void Century flashback. It might honestly be the best thing ever in the story, because as you should know after watching this video, Ichiro Oda is at his best when he's making flashbacks.